Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Rimshots with Sean, brought to you by Barstools and Bandtalk, Molson Canadian Coors Light. I'm not a corporate sellout, yet I am, so there you go. With me tonight, I've been looking forward to this for a couple weeks. This gentleman, some of you may know him, some of you may not. He has, I think, what I would dare I say, one of the most popular, biggest podcasts in all of our fair country, Mr. Jordan Bonaparte. How are you, sir?
I'm doing wonderful. I don't know about biggest, but I would say it is the best in the country. So
Well, I'd agree with that, and I did some research, and it's funny because you sent me your Wikipedia link, and there was a lot of stuff that I didn't know on there.
hmm.
Around 11 million downloads. Is that correct?
That would have been like at a time that was probably right, but it's more than that now. And I was lucky because I got in just as podcasting was taking off. I think the best thing that happened for me is I was like the first one in Canada doing Canadian crime stories. So the show kind of caught on early, but at this point it's probably closer to 25 to 30
Wow,
million. But
and that's
I've
impressive.
changed kind of hosts a bit, so I kind of lost track with each change.
Well, that's impressive, and I mean, out of Halifax, and I always tell people it's funny. Like I don't know what it is about um, folks such as that live here, but they think everybody else is bigger than them, and there's so much success here in our own backyard that people don't even realize it.
Yeah, so I think we're stuck with that kind of like small town little guy mentality, and at least for me it works. And I'm from Cape Breton, so you say Halifax, I feel like I'm in the big city here.
What
So
part of Cape Breton are you from?
the good part, Sydney.
Well, that's where I'm from, my friend. So there
Okay.
you go. So we get that in common too.
Yeah, I was born and raised there, but I moved to Halifax. Well, actually, I moved to Halifax on September 10th, 2001, and I know that because like the first morning in my new apartment, my first time away from home, the only room in the house at this point that had a TV was mine. So my roommates woke me up like my first morning, like something's going on in New York. We need to use your TV. And that
Uh,
was September 11th, 2001.
wow. It's yeah. We were talking about that the other day, and everybody, it's a remember you when moment.
Oh yeah.
So you started this in 2015, correct?
Thereabouts, yeah, yeah. October 2015 is when I started nighttime, and but before that, I was kind of helping other podcasts with editing and production stuff. So before I started my own, I was helping others. In fact, I didn't even really intend at first to make my own. I had made an episode of a podcast that I was going to try to get a friend of mine to air it on his as like kind of like a one-off thing. But then I was like, man, I might as well just release my own. And I wish I had planned it better because I chose the name Nighttime for my podcast simply because it was what I was working on during the nights for the month prior to launching it. So I was just calling it my Nighttime podcast. That was the name I stuck with when I launched it, and it was, I don't know, it's been a blessing and a curse. A blessing because it's a pretty kind of catch-all title that I guess just includes dark stories kind of thing. But I think a lot of people may see the name of my show or hear about my show and not realize that I cover Canadian stories that you may have heard of, I guess.
Well, and when we started this thing, I mean, really, it was we were all playing music, and then we get shut down. It was like, you know what? We'll do it for 5 weeks, and we'll be back to playing. And lo and behold, 5 weeks became a lot longer than that, and here we are, over 2 years. And I was the same way. I didn't think I'd still be doing this, and here I am. When you decided you were going to do this and you were going to put it together, how I guess what was your thinking, your rationale for the subject matter that you chose? Because it's something that's very interesting to people.
Yeah, I think for me it was kind of at the time in 2015, although that's not that long ago, there was a whole lot less podcasts to listen to. And there was very few, if any, that were covering Canadian stories. So my kind of when I started my idea, I actually had a pen and paper, and I wrote down a list of like topics or stories or people that I'd like to hear discussed on a podcast. And I probably put down like 30 or 40 stories, and it was just stuff that interested me, mainly stories from the east coast of Canada. As an example, on that list would have been things like the Shag Harbor UFO event, the McDonald's or the Sydney River McDonald's murders
Right.
was on that. The story of Alan Legier, who is a serial killer in Miramichi, New Brunswick. So I had like kind of these lists of stories that to me were huge stories that were fascinating that I thought everybody should know, yet weren't being discussed on all the podcasts I listened to. So that was kind of how I started it, just kind of going down that list, checking off the boxes and covering the stories. And the list may have been 40 or something at first, but I think I've probably done 400 or 500 episodes at this point.
It's interesting too. I mean, there's a lot of folklore around certain things like that. And the McDonald's murders. I mean, I got a connection. I was in a band. We were playing Smooth Hermans, and we were done. And we went to that McDonald's that night to try to get something, and they were closed. And we left and went to Jasper's. And not 30 minutes later, that whole thing happened. And you're smiling because you know exactly what I'm talking about. There's a lot of folklore around here, right? And again, there's all these stories that, to your point. I've been told news cycle. Once they fall into the news cycle, they just kind of go away and are forgotten about. So what you're doing, I think, really sheds light and keeps them going and informs people.
Yeah, I think there's a few things that kind of happen. One is something major happens on the east coast of Canada. It's rare that the story would spread across Canada, and it's extremely rare that it would spread into the United States or England or Sweden or whatever the case may be. So things to us that may be a huge deal. If I just kind of tell the story on my podcast, listeners in Ontario or Alberta are probably hearing it for the very first time. Yeah, so that's one thing. Or the next generation. Like, for example, the McDonald's murders. When I did a series covering that, I was hearing from so many listeners that were, 10 or 15 years younger than me that either had only heard of it in passing or had no idea that happened, right in their hometown sort of thing. So there's that. But then another thing you mentioned, the news cycle, is the way it's set up now where people get instant news is the way a story is told in the news is in little kind of bite-sized updates. So if something major happens, you hear on the first day, we don't know much, but a guy was murdered. The next day, you maybe get a little update about, where or what time or, who they're looking for in terms of suspects. And, each day as that goes on, there's just a new little update, but rarely does the media kind of take all those updates and put it together in one telling of the story from start to finish. So by simply doing that is, I guess, shining a light on some stories that are normally, again, told in a whole bunch of tweets over the period of weeks.
So, and I know, and we'll get on the stuff that you've been doing with the esteemed Mr. Palango later, but obviously you were doing some stuff with Frank Magazine and Andrew and those guys. And have you found that maybe when I use air quotes, the mainstream media, do you find that maybe they've turned on you or kind of been treating you a little bit different and like you're a substandard, I guess, news person since all this has happened?
Well, even before this, I like the news, like the mainstream media kind of people, real journalists. When they hear podcaster, they roll their eyes because podcasters have a reputation overall of being like, sourcing their information from like Wikipedia or just kind of reading other people's articles and making jokes and having, bad audio and all these sorts of things. I like to think that I kind of do podcasting right, where a lot of the stuff I cover is kind of firsthand research. For example, if I'm covering a missing person case, I'm generally not going to just read 2 or 3 articles and then just turn on my mic and just kind of say what I remember. I'll be reaching out to families or investigators or whatever and doing my best to get the full complete story out there. But anyway, it's generally in the world of journalism, a podcaster certainly isn't the cool guy. And having an association with someone like Frank Magazine, who I can confidently and objectively say is of ill repute, that doesn't help. And also the stuff I cover, like, maybe I'll do an important story like an unsolved murder or a missing persons case one week. The next week, I very well may just cover, I don't know, a UFO sighting or someone who has weird dreams, and I'll talk to them about their dreams for an hour. So I think if people don't take me seriously, they're probably still taking it more seriously than I take it, I guess is the way I would put it.
Well, and I mean, I found when we did our thing, and we're a video podcast per se, but we do some other things and we do some promotion. And, I'd be sitting there and we'd be interviewing Eric Martin, who sang, lead singer for Mr. Big, who was like a world renowned band, or Tim Ripper Owens, that replaced Rob Halford and Judas Priest. Yet we go and we ask a local guy here from Halifax, and we'd be like, "Oh, you're not good enough for me to talk to." And it was just kind of really funny because we still have a little bit of that component. And a lot of those folks, I mean, I said 2 years ago, you don't want to come on my show, you don't have to come on my show. I guess that's what I was asking you. You still have that kind of take
Oh,
from
that,
people?
yeah. I Here's what I think. And when I go to talk to someone, let's say I want to interview someone or invite them as a guest, the last thing I say is the dreaded word podcast, because
Yeah.
that sets people off, especially if they're not a listener of podcast. When I say, hey Jimmy, like I'm Jordan from Halifax. I have a podcast. I'd like to talk to you about, the story, your daughter's story or something. If this guy doesn't listen to podcasts, he probably thinks I'm just some nut with a laptop, which may or may not be true. And he may think that, he talks to me for 2 hours and 7 people may listen or something. So if instead of saying podcast, I'm fortunate where my show is partnered up with Chorus, who owns like global news and all this sort of stuff. So I can have a bit of credibility by kind of leveraging my association with global news. So if I'm reaching out to someone that is, let's say they're maybe a 50 plus or something, I'm thinking the odds of them being a podcast listener are lower. Maybe I will pitch it to them as I do an online radio show that's broadcast on global radio stations in some parts of Canada. That's kind of how I would pitch it. But if I'm reaching out to someone who's 21, I'm going to tell them I have a podcast, and I give them a couple of links that show that I have a bit of credibility. Last year, I won the Coast Best of Halifax. And so if I'm talking to someone from Halifax, just that is maybe enough. Like mentioning that is maybe enough to let them know that at least somebody listens. But yeah, it's hard to get to just to convince people that it's worth their time spending an hour with you.
Sure. So I'm gonna wrap this segment because I want to spend some time on the other stuff that we're talking about. However, we are a music show, and you did say, yeah, hey, I could talk about some music. So fire a
Anytime.
couple of music questions at you here just before we wrap this segment. So for starters, what's your, I guess, favorite genre? What do you typically listen to?
I think people will call it dad rock. Classic rock is certainly my thing. Guitar based rock music has always been my thing.
Nothing wrong with dad rock, but it doesn't come off with 39 hair metal from on Sirius XM for me. So go figure. What was the last show you were to?
Oh man, that's tough because of the pandemic. It was probably I haven't been to any in a long time. I saw GNR in Toronto probably 2.5 years ago. I think is probably the most recent show,
Fair enough.
and it was
Um,
awesome.
and they are great. So who would you consider your number one, I guess, musical act?
Oh geez, it's tough. I'd have to say like my five ties, and they change all the time. The one band I think that throughout my life I always go back to and will always enjoy, and you can bury me with some of their CDs and I'd be happy, would be AC/DC. I
Yeah.
think it's just perfect. And to my wife, she hears it and she's like, how do you listen? It just sounds like noise. And I have to explain to her, I'm like, honestly, like I feel like I could spend the rest of my life tinkering with guitar amps and guitars, and I would never get a sound as beautiful as just those two guitars together.
Yep.
She doesn't hear it, but ACDC's one. Led Zeppelin, I absolutely love. I'm a card carrying member of the Kiss Army.
Oh, but
Um,
well, you'll love this. Just pick
oh
this up.
yeah,
The
oh
40th
yeah,
anniversary reissue.
hell yeah, yeah. I love Kiss.
Yep.
And then being like kind of a kid of the '90s, Nirvana has a special place in my heart. I will always enjoy listening to Nirvana. I guess they'd probably be at the top of my head. They would be the four bands and the four groups that I think, again, I will always love.
I can still talk to you after that question because normally when I pose it, I get some stuff coming back to me where I go, geez, I can't talk to you anymore. So, anyway, we're going to wrap this segment. We're going to come back for segment two after this.